Clara had always believed that life on the mountains would bring her peace. She had grown up hearing stories about simple living, fresh air, and the quiet comfort of nature. When she married Aaron, she hoped their life together would be filled with warmth and understanding. But as the months passed, their marriage did not look like the hopeful dream she once carried. Aaron was often distant, quick to anger, and slow to offer any gentle word. Still, she tried her best to make their small cabin feel like a home. She cooked, cleaned, kept the fire warm, and prayed that one day Aaron would soften toward her. When Clara discovered she was expecting twins, she felt a light in her heart she had not felt in a long time. She imagined 2 small cribs, tiny blankets she would sew with her own hands, little socks drying near the fire. She silently promised her unborn children that she would give them all the love she had never received herself. But Aaron did not share her joy. He said babies meant more work, more cost, and more responsibility. Instead of hope, he saw fear. Clara tried to comfort him, reminding him that parents learned slowly, that they could manage together, but he remained troubled. Even then, she held on to hope. The winter came early that year. Snow started falling before the harvest was fully complete, and the wind carried a sharp bite that made every breath feel heavy. Clara knew deep inside her body that the twins were not ready to come yet, so she prayed every night for more time. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, while she was carrying firewood inside, she felt a sudden pain in her stomach that made her drop the logs. She leaned against the cabin wall, gasping, her breath turning white in the cold air. She whispered to herself that it was too early, far too early. She called out for Aaron, but he was out hunting. For what felt like hours, she curled on the floor of the cabin, trying to steady her breathing. The pain grew stronger with each passing moment. She wrapped herself in blankets, trying to warm her shaking body. When Aaron finally returned, he saw her pale face and frightened eyes. Instead of comforting her, panic flashed across his face. He muttered that this was the worst possible time, that he was not ready, that things were happening too fast. Clara held his hand and begged him to stay beside her. She felt cold sweat on her forehead, and pain ran through her body like lightning. Aaron paced the room instead. When the labor started, Clara cried out softly, trying to keep her voice steady. She did not want to scare her babies, even though she knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. The small cabin felt darker than usual, as if the storm outside had slipped inside the walls. After long hours of pain and tears, the twins arrived. They were tiny, far too tiny. Their little hands were no bigger than Clara's fingernails. She held them close to her chest, hoping her warmth would be enough to keep them alive. But their breaths were weak and uneven. Clara whispered prayers over them, her tears falling onto their soft skin. Aaron stood in the corner, watching with a blank expression. He did not approach. He did not speak. Clara felt her heart breaking even before the final moment came. She felt the stillness in her arms, the silence that filled the room. She held them longer than necessary, unable to let go. She sang the lullaby her mother had taught her when she was young, even though her voice shook with grief. The storm outside howled, but Clara only heard her own quiet sobs. When she finally looked up at Aaron, hoping for comfort, she was met with disappointment. Aaron's eyes were cold. He whispered that this was too much, that he couldn't handle such a life, that everything had fallen apart. Clara tried to explain that she needed him, that they could mourn together, that she had nothing left except him. But he shook his head. He grabbed a small bag, stuffed it with food and tools, and turned toward the door. Clara reached out weakly, telling him she couldn't even stand. She begged him not to leave her alone in the cold. Her voice trembled, her hands shook, and her body felt hollow. But Aaron's mind had already made a decision that she could not understand. He said that he needed to start over somewhere else, that he couldn't stay in a place filled with reminders of loss. Without looking back at her, he pulled the door open. Cold wind rushed inside, blowing out half the fire. Snowflakes landed on Clara's hair and blankets. Aaron stepped outside, closed the door halfway, then paused. For a moment, she thought he might return to her. But he only stood still for a few seconds before walking away. His footprints were quickly covered by falling snow. Clara listened to the sound of the door clicking shut, and it echoed in the quiet room like a final goodbye. She tried to call out again, but her voice was too weak. She tried to move her legs, but they refused to support her. She crawled toward the door, dragging herself inch by inch across the cold wooden floor. When she reached the threshold, she pushed the door open again. The freezing wind slapped her face, making her eyes water. She wrapped the thin blanket around herself and looked into the darkness. And of enter, the blanket, and of enter. There was no sign of Aaron. No movement, no sound, except the storm. Her tears froze on her cheeks as she whispered a final plea into the night, hoping somehow he might hear her and return. But the wind swallowed her voice. She sank onto the snow-covered ground outside the cabin, unable to keep her body steady. The cold seeped through her bones, and her fingers grew numb. She looked up at the sky, wondering why life had been so cruel. She had done everything right, everything she could. And yet her babies were gone, and now her husband had abandoned her. Her breaths grew shallow. She tried to curl into herself for warmth, hugging the blanket tightly around her small frame. She thought about the twins again, imagining them warm and safe in a better place. She whispered their names softly, hoping the sky would carry her words to them. Her eyelids grew heavy, but she fought the urge to close them. She knew that if she fell asleep in the snow, she might never wake up again. The storm grew stronger, and the cabin door creaked behind her. Clara wished she had the strength to crawl back inside, but her body refused to move. Every muscle felt stiff and frozen. She focused on breathing, on holding on staying alive just a little longer. Her mind drifted between memories, her mother's gentle smile, the day she first arrived at the small cabin as a bride, the first flutter of the twins moving inside her. She held on to those memories like fragile treasures. Minutes felt like hours. Her vision blurred, and she could no longer feel her hands or feet. She thought she heard footsteps far away, but she wasn't sure if it was real or just a dream. She tried to call out again, but only a soft breath escaped her lips. The world around her slowly faded, and she felt a strange peace washing over her. She told herself that if this was her last moment, she would welcome it with calmness. She had tried her best. She had loved deeply, and she had survived more pain than anyone knew. Just as darkness was about to take her completely, a faint sound reached her ears. It was the sound of a horse snorting, followed by heavy boots on snow. Clara forced her eyes open slightly, trying to see if someone was truly there or if her mind was playing tricks. She saw a blurry figure moving toward her, calling out in a strong voice. She could not understand the words, but the tone sounded worried, almost urgent. She tried to lift her hand, but it barely moved. The figure rushed toward her, kneeling beside her, his warm hands brushing the snow off her face. Clara heard him speak again, this time softer, closer. She thought she felt someone lifting her, wrapping something warm around her shoulders. For the first time since her twins had passed, she felt a small spark of warmth inside her chest, the faint beginning of hope. Before she lost consciousness, she whispered a weak thank you, even though she didn't know who the stranger was. She only knew that someone had finally heard her silent cry for help. When Luke found Clara lying half-buried in the snow, he felt a shock run through his body. He had seen many things during his travels, storms, injuries, lost travelers, but never a woman so fragile and cold, left alone in such a dangerous storm. He quickly lifted her in his arms, feeling how light and weak she was. She barely weighed more than the blankets wrapped around her. Her skin was icy, her lips pale, and her breaths soft and uneven. Luke's heart tightened with worry as he carried her toward the small cabin nearby. Inside the cabin, the fire had nearly died. Luke set her gently beside the hearth, then moved fast. He placed more wood into the fire, blowing gently until the flames grew stronger. Warm light filled the room, chasing away the heavy shadows. He took off his thick coat and wrapped it around Clara, tucking it close to her body. She shivered, showing signs of life, but she was far from safe. Luke spoke to her in a calm voice, hoping it would anchor her. He told her she was not alone anymore, that he would help her, and that she was safe. Clara tried to open her eyes, but they fluttered weakly. She whispered something he could barely hear. He leaned closer, and she repeated the word, husband, in a broken voice. Luke paused for a moment, unsure what she meant. He asked her where her husband was, but she did not answer clearly. Her words faded like a light breeze. Luke moved around the room, searching for anything that could help. He found a small pot and filled it with snow, placing it over the fire to melt. He checked the cupboards and found a few food items: stale bread, dried beans, and a small jar of honey. It was not much, but it was enough to give her strength once she woke. He gently lifted Clara's head and gave her a sip of warm water once it melted. Her throat moved slowly as she swallowed. Seeing even this small response made Luke breathe easier. He sat beside her, watching her with worried eyes. The storm outside beat against the cabin walls, but inside, a quiet determination filled the space. Luke knew he could not leave her alone, not even for a moment. After some time, Clara's breathing steadied slightly. She opened her eyes a fraction and looked around as if trying to understand where she was. When her gaze settled on Luke, she looked confused and frightened. Luke quickly reassured her, telling her he had found her in the snow and brought her inside. Clara listened, but tears gathered in her eyes. She whispered an apology, though Luke did not know what she was apologizing for. He told her softly that she didn't need to explain right now. She needed warmth, food, and rest. Her eyes drifted shut again, exhausted from even that small effort. Luke placed more blankets over her and stayed close to the fire to keep the room warm. Hours passed slowly. The storm howled on, refusing to let up. Luke kept the fire alive, checked Clara's breathing, and made sure she remained warm. He placed his canteen near the fire, letting the water warm slightly before helping her drink again. She was fighting to stay alive, even if her body felt too weak to show it. When night settled deeper around the cabin, Luke positioned himself against the wall, close enough to hear Clara if she needed anything. He did not sleep. His mind kept returning to one question: who had left her outside in the snow? No person should abandon someone in such a cruel way. It troubled him deeply, stirring a quiet anger inside him. He knew he would not judge her situation without hearing the full story, but the signs spoke clearly she had not been left accidentally. As dawn approached, the storm began to ease. A soft glow filled the room as the fire crackled. Clara stirred again, her breaths a little stronger now. Luke moved to her side. When she opened her eyes, she looked around with fear, perhaps expecting to see someone else. But when she saw only Luke, she relaxed slightly, though sadness clouded her expression. Luke greeted her gently and asked if she could drink some warm tea he had prepared. She nodded faintly. He helped her sit up slowly, supporting her back with his arm. She winced in pain, and he immediately steadied her. Clara drank the tea in tiny sips, her hands shaking. Luke's coat still wrapped around her, and she held it tight as though afraid the warmth might disappear. Once she finished, Luke placed the cup aside and asked her if she could tell him what happened. Clara stared at the fire for a long time, her eyes reflecting deep hurt. Then she began to speak in a weak, trembling voice. She explained that she had given birth too early, that her twins had not survived, and that her husband could not handle the loss. Luke listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as she spoke. Clara told him how she had begged Aaron not to leave her, but he had walked away into the storm, carrying their supplies and leaving her alone with grief and cold. She stopped several times, wiping tears with shaky fingers. Luke offered her a cloth and waited patiently whenever her voice broke. He did not rush her. He knew she needed someone to listen. When she finished, she looked at Luke with tired eyes, as if expecting him to judge her. Instead, he shook his head gently. He told her she had done nothing wrong, that her suffering was not her fault. He promised her she would not be left alone again. Clara's eyes filled with silent gratitude. No one had spoken to her with such care for a long time. Luke checked the storm through a small window. The snow had calmed, and morning light touched the white landscape. But traveling immediately would be too risky. Clara was still weak, and they needed to wait a little longer. He told her they would leave once she regained enough strength. Clara did not argue. Unter 41. Argue too. She simply nodded, trusting the stranger who had saved her life. Over the next day, Luke continued to look after her. He cooked a simple stew with the supplies he had brought for himself, giving Clara the softest portions. She ate slowly, but her appetite returned little by little. She slept often, and each time she woke, Luke was somewhere nearby, either feeding the fire, preparing water, or checking the horses outside. His calm presence made the cabin feel less empty, less lonely. Clara sometimes watched him quietly, wondering why a man would help a stranger with such care. Luke noticed her gaze once and gave her a small, reassuring smile. He told her he had seen too much suffering in his life and that if he had the chance to help someone, he wouldn't let it pass. Clara found comfort in his words, though a part of her struggled to believe she deserved kindness. At night, when the wind outside turned gentle, Clara finally gathered enough strength to sit up by herself. Luke helped her to a more comfortable spot near the fire. They shared a quiet moment as the flames danced softly. Luke asked her if she had any family. She shook her head. She had no one left, except distant relatives who lived far away and seldom wrote. Luke nodded thoughtfully, knowing loneliness was a heavy burden. He suggested that once she was strong enough, she could come with him to his ranch for a while. It belonged to him and his sister, who lived there year-round. They always had room for someone in need. Clara's eyes widened with uncertainty. She whispered that she didn't want to cause trouble for anyone. Luke shook his head with a gentle firmness. He told her she wasn't trouble. She was someone who needed help, and there was no shame in accepting it. The warmth of his words softened something inside her. For the first time in many months, she felt a small sense of safety growing in her heart. She looked down at her hands and noticed they were no longer trembling quite so much. Luke's calm patience had begun to rebuild a strength she didn't know she still had. As the second day came to an end, Clara managed to stand with Luke's help. She took a few steps across the cabin, leaning on him, but her legs held her. She felt surprised, almost proud. Luke smiled warmly and told her she was doing well. Clara felt a spark of hope. Maybe life had not ended with the storm. Maybe there was more waiting for her, something she could not yet see. That night, as she rested near the fire, she whispered a soft, "Thank you." Luke simply nodded, telling her it was nothing. But Clara knew it was everything. Without him, she would not have survived the storm. She closed her eyes, feeling a gentle peace settle inside her. The storm outside had ended. And slowly, the storm inside her heart began to quiet as well. When the storm finally cleared, the world outside the cabin looked quiet and peaceful. But Clara knew the calmness was only on the surface. Everything inside her still felt fragile. Luke stood at the door, looking out at the white fields stretching far into the distance. He turned to her with a gentle smile and said the weather was good enough to travel. Clara nodded slowly, though a small fear settled in her chest. She had not been outside since the night she almost died. The thought of facing the cold again made her shiver. Luke noticed her hesitation and reassured her softly. He told her they would ride slowly, that he would make sure she stayed warm, and that she would not be alone for even a moment. His words steadied her heart. She gathered the blanket around her shoulders and allowed him to help her outside. The snow crunched under their feet, bright and soft. The horses stood patiently, their breath rising in small clouds. Luke carefully lifted Clara onto his horse, making sure she was secure. He climbed up behind her so she would not fall, and wrapped a thick fur around both of them to keep out the cold. The ride toward Luke's ranch was slow and gentle. Clara leaned against him, not because she wanted to, but because her tired body had no strength left. Luke did not mind. He held the reins with one hand and kept the other close enough to steady her. The steady rhythm of the horse's movement made Clara feel strangely calm. She listened to the sound of hooves pressing into the snow and the soft rustle of wind in the trees. For the first time in many days, she allowed her eyes to close for a moment, trusting Luke to guide the way. They passed through open fields, small hills, and frozen streams. Every now and then, Luke pointed out landmarks, trying to keep her mind occupied. He told her stories, simple, gentle ones about his ranch, his childhood, and the horses he had raised. Clara listened quietly. His voice carried warmth, and the stories gave her something to hold on to as they traveled. When they finally reached the ranch, Clara lifted her head weakly. The place looked peaceful, almost comforting. A large wooden house stood near a fenced field. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a warm golden glow shone through the windows. Chickens wandered near the porch, and 2 horses grazed in the nearby paddock. Luke's sister, Mary, stepped outside when she heard the horse approaching. She had a soft face, kind eyes, and a gentle smile that made Clara feel welcomed instantly. Mary rushed forward when she saw Clara's weak condition. Luke explained everything quickly, and Mary's expression shifted from concern to compassion. She took Clara's cold hands in her own and told her she was safe now. Clara felt a lump in her throat. After everything she had been through, the simple kindness of another woman felt overwhelming. Luke helped Clara down from the horse, but her legs barely held her. Mary wrapped her arm around Clara and guided her inside the warm house. The heat from the fireplace swept over Clara the moment she stepped through the door, making her feel like she had entered another world. She sank into the softness of a chair, and Mary brought her warm water with honey. Luke removed his coat and set it beside the fire to dry. The house smelled of fresh bread, herbs, and wood smoke scents Clara had missed deeply. Over the next few days, Mary and Luke took care of Clara with steady patience. Mary prepared gentle food, soup, porridge, warm tea, and sat with Clara while she ate. She never asked uncomfortable questions, never pushed her to explain more than she wanted. She simply offered comfort. Luke worked around the ranch during the day but returned often to check on Clara, bringing logs for the fire or asking if she needed anything. His quiet care made her feel safe in a way she had never known before. Clara slowly regained her strength. She helped Mary with light chores, folding laundry, cutting vegetables, brushing the horses when Luke allowed her outside. Each task rebuilt a part of her confidence. She began to smile again. She laughed softly when Mary told her about Luke's clumsy childhood stories. She took her first steps outside the house without support and felt proud, even if they were small steps. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the snowy hills, Clara sat on the porch, wrapped in a warm shawl. The sky blazed with pink and orange colors, and the cold air brushed gently against her cheeks. She watched Luke walk across the yard, carrying a saddle back to the barn. He paused when he saw her and walked over with a soft smile. He sat beside her, leaving enough space so she didn't feel crowded. He asked her how she was feeling, and Clara admitted she still felt hollow sometimes, but not as lost as before. Luke listened with quiet respect. He did not tell her to forget the past or pretend everything was fine. Instead, he told her healing took time, and she had already come farther than she realized. Clara looked at him, noticing how calm he always seemed. She asked him why he had stopped when he saw her in the snow. Many people might have ignored a shape on the ground during a storm. Luke looked out toward the horizon for a moment before answering. He said he had once lost someone he cared about, because no one had helped her in time. From that day on, he promised himself he would not turn away from anyone in need. His words touched Clara deeply. She realized he understood loss in his own way, even if the stories were different. She felt a connection forming between them, soft and gentle, like something growing quietly in the background. As the days turned into weeks, Clara grew stronger physically and emotionally. She started helping Luke with the horses more often. She brushed their coats, fed them, and even helped Luke lead them to the pasture. The animals seemed to sense her gentle nature and responded with calmness. Luke watched her with quiet admiration, noticing how her face brightened when she worked with the animals. Mary began treating Clara like family, asking her opinion on small household matters, sewing with her in the evenings, and sitting beside her by the fire. Clara felt safe in a way she had not felt in years. But even with all this warmth around her, she still carried doubts. One night, she confessed to Mary that she felt guilty for accepting help. She felt like a burden, someone who had brought trouble into their peaceful home. Mary took Clara's hands and told her firmly that she was not a burden. She explained that sometimes people needed help, and offering help was never a loss, it was a gift both ways. She reminded Clara that she had shown strength by surviving the storm and everything before it. Clara's heart softened a little more after hearing those words. Another small change happened around the same time. Clara began noticing Luke differently. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the quiet strength in his voice, the way he always made sure she was comfortable before tending to anything else. His presence brought her calmness. She didn't feel pressured or afraid around him. She felt understood. Luke, too, noticed Clara's growing confidence. He admired her bravery, her gentle nature, and the way she never complained, despite everything she had endured. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her, asking if she wanted to help with the barn, offering to show her the new foal, or telling her small stories to make her smile. But he never crossed a line. He never made her uncomfortable. He simply stayed near, giving her time to heal. One crisp morning, as Clara walked across the yard, she spotted tracks leading away from the ranch. Luke had gone into town early with the wagon. Mary said he needed supplies. But Clara felt something uneasy inside her. She wondered if Aaron had been seen in the nearby towns. She did not want problems to reach the ranch. She did not want Luke and Mary to suffer because of her past. When Luke returned in the afternoon, Clara met him in the yard. He looked surprised to see her waiting for him. She asked softly if everything was all right. Luke looked at her, then nodded. He told her he had heard some news that people were searching for her husband, that the community was talking about what happened. Clara felt her stomach twist. She lowered her eyes and whispered that she didn't want any trouble to come to Luke or Mary. Luke stepped closer, not too close, but enough so she could hear him clearly. He told her she was not responsible for what her husband had done. He told her she deserved peace and that no trouble was her fault. Clara felt tears fill her eyes, but these tears were softer than the ones she had shed before. They were tears of relief. As the sun set behind the hills, Clara felt something shift inside her. She was beginning to trust life again. She was beginning to trust herself. And whether she admitted it aloud or not, she was beginning to trust the man who had saved her. This was the beginning of a new strength inside her. A strength built not from ignoring her past, but from slowly rising above it, one small step at a time. The winter snow began to melt slowly, leaving soft patches of grass peeking through the white blanket that had covered the land for months. Clara stood outside the ranch house one morning, watching small drops of water slide down the wooden fence. Each drop felt like a quiet reminder that seasons changed, and life, too, could change if given enough time. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and breathed in the crisp, fresh air. It no longer felt cold and frightening. It felt cleaner, lighter, almost hopeful. Inside the house, Mary prepared breakfast while Luke saddled the horses for a short ride into town. He had told Clara and Mary the night before that someone from the town council had sent a message. There was news about Aaron. Clara had felt her heart tighten when she heard his name. But she didn't panic like before. She listened calmly, knowing she was no longer alone. Luke looked at her gently, telling her he would go into town, learn the full report, and return quickly. She believed him. When Luke rode off that morning, Clara watched him disappear down the snowy path. She felt a strange mixture of fear and courage inside her. She didn't know what the news about Aaron would mean for her life, but she knew she was no longer the same woman who had been left to freeze in the storm. She was stronger now, strong enough to face the truth, whatever it might be. Mary noticed Clara's quiet expression and came to stand beside her. She offered her a warm cup of tea and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Clara smiled and thanked her. Mary suggested they keep busy while waiting for Luke, and Clara agreed. They fed the chickens, folded laundry in the sunlight, and even baked a small loaf of sweet bread. The house smelled warm and full of life. But even with these comforting tasks, Clara's thoughts wandered again and again to the path that led to town. Hours passed slowly. When the sun reached the middle of the sky, Clara stepped outside again, unable to stay still any longer. She looked toward the distant road, hoping to see Luke's figure returning. Mary joined her, sensing her worry. She assured Clara that Luke was dependable and would return soon. Clara nodded, trusting Mary's words, though her heart beat a little faster with every passing minute. Finally, near mid-afternoon, Clara saw a small cloud of dust rising far down the road. Her breath caught in her chest. She leaned forward slightly, trying to make out the shape. Yes, it was Luke. He rode with steady confidence, but she could tell from his posture that he carried heavy news. Clara felt her hands tighten around the shawl. Mary gently squeezed her arm and whispered that they would face everything together. Clara nodded and waited as Luke drew closer, his horse slowing in front of the fence. He dismounted quickly, tied the reins, and walked toward them with calm but serious eyes. Clara stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. She asked him what he had learned. Luke looked at her with deep respect, offering her a moment to prepare herself. He told her that Aaron had been found in a nearby town. When people learned what he had done, leaving his wife in the snow after the loss of their babies, they reacted with anger and disbelief. Clara listened silently, her hands trembling slightly. Luke continued, explaining that the community had reported Aaron's actions to the local authorities. A hearing had taken place that morning. Clara felt her heart sink, but she kept her gaze fixed on Luke. He told her that during the hearing, Aaron had tried to defend himself by blaming the storm, claiming panic, claiming fear. But witnesses spoke up. People who had seen him arrive in town alone talked about how he had not shown grief, only frustration and selfish worry. Others testified that no decent husband would abandon his wife during such a vulnerable moment. Slowly, the truth became too clear for anyone to ignore. Clara felt tears warm her eyes. She whispered that she had never wished for anger or revenge. She had only wished for safety. Luke nodded and gently told her that the hearing had ended with a clear message. Aaron would be held accountable. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the news settle inside her. She felt both sadness and relief, sadness for what had happened, but relief that she no longer had to fear him. Luke stepped closer, his voice softer now. He told her that she was free to build her life without looking over her shoulder. No one expected anything more from her. She was simply safe now. Hearing those words, Clara's tears finally fell. Mary wrapped her arms around Clara, holding her gently as Clara let go of the weight she had carried for so long. Later that evening, after the sun had set and the ranch was quiet, Clara sat on the porch, wrapped in a warm shawl. Luke joined her with 2 cups of warm tea. He handed her one and sat beside her, leaving enough space so she felt comfortable. The sky was filled with stars, glowing softly above the peaceful land. Clara watched the sky for a long time before speaking. She told Luke that for the first time in months, she felt like she could take a full breath without fear. Luke listened quietly, giving her the space to share whatever she needed. Clara admitted that she still mourned her twins, that she still carried pain in her heart, but she felt something new growing too, something gentle, something steady. Luke told her that healing did not erase the past, but it could help her move forward with strength. His words were warm and calm, and Clara found comfort in them. Over the next weeks, life on the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. Clara helped Mary with sewing, cooking, and taking care of the chickens. She spent mornings brushing the horses with Luke or feeding the animals. She enjoyed long walks along the fence line, breathing in fresh spring air as the world slowly changed around her. Tiny flowers sprouted along the edges of the fields, and the sound of running water filled the air as the frozen streams melted. Clara felt as if nature itself was healing. Luke continued to treat her with patience and quiet kindness. He never pushed her, never forced conversations, but always made sure she knew she was welcome in every part of the ranch. Clara noticed the small things he did for her, how he fixed the loose step on the porch because she used it most often, how he set aside the softest apples for her because he knew she liked them, how he always paused his work when she called his name. Slowly, Clara's feelings began to deepen. She didn't tell anyone at first. She wasn't even sure Luke felt anything in return, but she found herself smiling when he entered a room, feeling lighter when he was nearby, and wondering about him even when he was tending to the fields. These feelings scared her a little, but they also made her feel alive again. One warm afternoon, Clara was helping Mary hang fresh laundry outside, when Mary suddenly asked her gently if she had begun to find happiness again. Clara felt shy and unsure of how to answer. Mary smiled kindly, saying that joy was not something to fear, it was something to welcome after a long winter of pain. Clara looked down at the linen in her hands and realized Mary understood more than she let on. That evening, Clara walked out to the barn where Luke was brushing his favorite horse. She stood quietly for a moment, watching how gentle his hands moved. When he noticed her, he smiled in that calm, steady way that always softened her heart. Clara stepped closer and told him she wanted to thank him not just for saving her life in the snow, but for giving her a place where she could feel safe again. Luke set the brush down and looked at her seriously. He told her he had not done anything special. Any decent person would have helped. Clara shook her head gently. She told him not everyone would have done what he did. He saved her from death, gave her shelter, offered her calm words when she was at her weakest, and treated her with respect when she questioned her own worth. Luke's expression softened. He reached out slowly, not rushing, not assuming, and he gently touched her hand. Clara didn't pull away. Instead, she felt a sense of peace flow through her. She knew this moment was not rushed. It had grown slowly, naturally, like spring, after a long winter. Luke told her she had courage inside her that he admired deeply. He said she had survived more than most people ever faced, and still she moved with kindness. Clara felt warmth bloom inside her chest at his words. She had never been spoken to like that before. As the sun faded into the golden horizon, Clara realized she was no longer holding on to life because she feared losing it. She was holding on because she could finally see a future she wanted to live in. A future standing beside the kind cowboy who had helped her begin again.